Director for the city of Claremont. I've been with Claremont a little over 4 years now. I've spent the entirety of my professional career, about 27 years, entirely in the San Gabriel Valley, different cities throughout the valley, from Walnut to Rosemead to El Monte to Pomona to Claremont. So I have a lot of experience in the planning realm of municipal planning. I currently also manage the Building and Safety Division here in Claremont, the Engineering Division, and oversee our Code Enforcement Division that we refer to as Community Improvement. So a little background on me. I am here tonight to talk about the housing element update. It's in one sense, a little bit premature to talk about the entirety of the element because we're not quite done with the draft yet. But we have been working on it for a couple of years, and we're getting very close to being able to release a draft. We're a little behind schedule, and I know the community has been asking for updates. So hopefully at the end of the presentation, I can set some generic timelines on where we think we're going to end up. But as far as the history of housing elements in the state of California, the housing element has been around California for over 50 years. It's been a mandatory element of cities' general plans in California. And for about the last 25 years, it was due every 5 years. So it was a mandatory requirement to turn it into the state and plan for future housing. Many argue that it's never had any teeth in past decades and has never really produced housing. It's just been this onerous state requirement that cities do and really doesn't result in much. But that has been changing the last few years, and certainly will be changing in the upcoming years. Instead of a 4-year cycle, about 5 years ago, the state switched to a 4-year and an 8-year cycle. So cities that were getting their elements in on time were granted a 8-year approval time, and communities that were not meeting the deadlines for HCD, which is the Department of Housing and Community Development at a state level, the penalty for those communities was you have to now be on a 4-year time frame. And these type of activities and documents are quite costly to cities. So that was the incentive, that a city wouldn't have to spend $100,000 to $500,000 on consultants and a document and a lot of processing and time. Unfortunately, Claremont has been on a 4-year cycle the last couple of cycles, and the city just found out actually a few days ago that there was a recent bill signed by the governor, AB 787, that actually is going to put all the cities back on an 8-year time frame and get rid of the 4-year time frame. So in one sense, Claremont's very glad to hear that news. In another sense, what it does is it sets a trigger for rezoning of our properties to meet our regional housing numbers. It sets us on a 4-month time frame from October. So by February, if we don't have our housing element certified, we are going to be required to do our rezonings within a 12-month time frame, which previously was a 36-month time frame. So it's again just a way for the state to ensure that cities are moving along with their housing elements and actually working on them, getting them adopted by their local city councils, and ultimately certified by the state. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here to pull up some related documents. It looks like I'm disabled from screen sharing. Alex, can you disable that?
Sorry, I'm figuring it out right now. Does anyone else know how to do share screen? Maybe I need to click on your profile. Yeah, I think I did. I don't know how to do it. It says only the host can share in this meeting.
That's okay. I'll just keep going, and if you can figure it out as we go along, let me know.
Okay,
And
all right, I'll let you know.
You said I had 30 to 40 minutes, correct?
Yeah,
Okay, so continuing, so the housing element, what it requires is that cities plan for their fair share of regional housing opportunities for properties within the city, and those it's referred to as RHNA, short for Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and that's for all income levels. It's for extremely low, very low, low, moderate, and market rate housing. The housing law also requires that cities allow and identify for where emergency shelters and transitional and supportive housing can go in the community without any type of discretionary or public hearing requirements. The city actually did that in our last cycle, and we picked the and adopted the institutional zoning districts to allow for shelters, and we allow transitional and supportive housing in any zoning district, multifamily that allows similar types of multiple unit structures within them. So we don't say in a RM 2000 or 4000 zone that you can't do it. It's simply allowed by right for, again, transitional and supportive. There's also a requirement that we assist in the development of adequate housing for the needs of all income categories. What it doesn't say that the city actually has to build it. So that really the goal of the housing element is to remove any hurdles that zoning changes would necessitate for projects to be built to meet all income levels. So again, it's not the building of it, it's just assisting through changing general plan designations and zoning designations. It's also meant to remove any governmental constraints to improving and developing housing of all income levels, including people with disabilities and people with developmental disabilities. It's meant to conserve and improve the conditions of our existing housing stock. It's meant to promote housing opportunities for all persons, regardless of race, religion, sex, marital status, ancestry, national origin, color, familial status, or disability, and finally preserve for lower income households assisted housing developments.
sorry to interrupt. Can you try sharing your screen again?
Yes.
Yay.
I can see it now. Great.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry for the trouble.
Atta girl, Alexandra.
Okay, so let me scooch forward to some slides. So in our housing element, when it is released as a full public draft document, which our goal is within a few weeks from today, you'll see a lot of demographic tables and charts and information. So tonight I'm just going to share a few that are of interest that just show either the history of the city or what we need to plan for in the future. This graphic here just shows you the population explosion we had starting in, between 1940 and 1950, where you see that huge increase where the city grew by 106%, and then in 1960 to almost another 100%, and by 1970 almost another 100%, which you'll see at the bottom of the chart brings us to our current day population of 37,266 persons living in the city. You see the data source at the bottom there is a US Census. You'll see a variety of data sources throughout the document when it is released. And it's a little challenging when a census is released. They don't release, like the 2020, you see these numbers come from that, but not all the numbers from the census are available. So you'll see other estimates that may be 2019, some HUD estimates that are 2017, but relatively these numbers are very close. You'll just see some what appear to be inconsistencies, but they aren't. They're just the most current data sources out there. So all people in Claremont are not wealthy, as you can see from this this slide here. This breaks down the percentage of residents in the city, or percentage of households in the city. You can see roughly 70% are moderate, defined as moderate income at 81% or greater of the area median income. and roughly, 12.5, roughly 10% in every other category. You have 12.5 at low, 10.3 at very low, and 9.4 at extremely low. And I'll define what those numbers mean in a future slide. Some of the more interesting percentages and growth numbers and decline numbers that some in the community may not believe, but the facts are the facts. You'll see in the next slide, I show that there's been actually a significant increase in the senior population in the 55 to 64 age category, and this is over the last 10-year period, an increase of 9.8%, and those in older than 65, an increase of 36.6%. And the largest decrease was in school-age children group from 5 to 19 years, and that was over a 12% decline. And just another interesting fact that our overall household growth over the last 20 years grew at 7.5% to today's number of 11,729. And that is what this slide here shows. Actually, this slide I highlighted because excuse me, I'm getting blocked by some of my images here. The household types between 2020 and today, and the percentage change, and you can see what a massive change we've had in the 65 and over group. Over the last 2 decades, it's been a 243% increase. So again, we can see that we have a very aging population here in Claremont, and need to make sure that our goals and policies that are in our housing element really focus on that, as well as growing other categories in the city. This is the another portion of the chart that shows that school age drop between 2010 and 2019 of about 12%. And again, those changes in the different categories of 55 to 64 and 65 and over at 9.8 and 37%. Moving on to the prices of single family homes and condominiums in Claremont. You can see from this graphic that Claremont housing is very expensive. It's more expensive than all of the cities surrounding Claremont and even LA County as a whole. I'm sure this number is even a little higher today. It seems as if the prices of homes creeps up weekly significantly. You can see the percent change in Claremont is about 26% between 2016 and 2021. So housing is very high cost here in Claremont. This is the rental market in Claremont and what that looks like actually today. You can see the rent ranges and what the median rents are for apartments and condos versus townhomes versus single family homes. Again, pretty significant numbers from past years. So back to the RHNA, or it's RENA as it is known. This number that you see at the bottom first column of 1,711, that's for this next 8-year planning cycle that we're in. We refer to it as cycle 6. In cycle 5, which was the last 8 years, we were 1/5 of this number as required by the state and the agencies that redistributed it down to a local level and gave each individual city their calculation numbers, and then broken down by the different income categories. So Claremont is not alone. All of the cities in our region across the state are looking at, comparatively to what the last planning cycle was, just enormous numbers. And that really speaks to the state wanting to resolve or assist or aid in the housing crisis that we're in. Many believe that crisis is because of a supply and demand issue, that California has just not been issuing the number of building permits for decades that the demand has been there for. So with that disparity in supply and demand, it's really the state's goal to break down any barriers for housing to be created, And in their mind, that includes communities that don't want any growth or development in their community. And so it's unfortunately, a lot of cities don't appreciate the state getting in what they feel to be a local land use control and the business of an individual city. So there's been a rub, obviously, between the state and cities for many, many years. But I think there's just been an aggravation on both at a local level and a state level that something needs to be done. And so, again, it's not forcing cities to build, it's forcing cities to zone to allow developers that do build different kinds of housing, all kinds of housing, to have the opportunity to do it in any community in the state of California. So you can see our numbers broken down by the various income groups and what that means for median family income. 278 for extremely low, 278 for very low, 310 for low, 297 for moderate, and then about 550 for market rate units. Claremont has not had a problem producing units in the last housing requirement cycle, the last RENA cycle, in the moderate, and certainly not the above moderate category. Where Claremont has struggled, as most cities in California, is in the low, very low, and extremely low category. It's just incredibly expensive in California for the cost of labor, for the cost of materials, for the cost of land. It is extremely expensive to build even a single unit. And those type of units require subsidies. Several years ago, the governor took away redevelopment agencies in the city, in all the cities in California, and redevelopment agencies in the past had been able to subsidize many of those units. Cities were required to set aside 20% of the tax increment financing for redevelopment funds that were coming in as a result of property values going up. And so that funding source is no longer around, and the state is looking at other ways to assist the federal government, the state government, but certainly cities can't do it on their own. Again, I think the estimates for a single unit of affordable, apartment unit in the Claremont area is between $400,000 and $500,000 to build it, including soft costs and hard costs. So you can imagine the number of units across all of the cities in California is just a phenomenally big number. And the last thing I'll say about this slide before I move on is that 1,711, we actually have to plan for 20% beyond that number, because there's also some new legislation that the state has adopted that's referred to as the no net loss. So if we zone and identify a parcel to now be required to identify how many of each income categories for that parcel. If a developer comes in and pulls a building permit and builds something less or different, we have to eliminate those numbers in our overall calculation, and we can't fall below that 1711 as we go through this 8-year period, or we would have to go back within a 6-month time frame and rezone and upzone another property in the city. So our goal is to at least plan for a number that's 20% bigger than that 1711, which would be 2,053 units. You'll see on a map that I'm going to show later that we've actually found many more parcels and density than that even. So that's what will be presented to the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council. But the 1,711 is our RENA target number, and we're allowed to go back and count units back to June of last year. So this chart is showing that with the number of ADUs, and I'm going to caveat this with, I just saw these numbers for the first time a couple days ago, so I haven't fact checked them, but they will be fact checked before our element goes out. So describing what low income and moderate means as far as dollar figures. This chart here shows the family size in the far left column, and then it shows the various affordability levels in all the other columns. So for instance, a 4-person family, defined as low income is a household income of 94,600. That box is on there for another purpose. We use this graphic in a recent presentation to the city council on our inclusionary housing ordinance, which I'll touch on later, but it's a problem that's been arising for 20 years, according to our consultants, of the moderate income being set by the state and the low income being set by HUD at a federal level, that they've been on this crash course of essentially being the same group of people. And so we attempted to resolve that. And the city council, I believe, did with their recent amendment to our inclusionary housing ordinance. But again, just to give you an idea of what family incomes look like for a single person, all the way up to an 8-person household size. So the city, as far as existing affordable housing units and the future of creating more affordable housing units, the city, we do have 7 properties in the city that have been developed over, the last couple of decades that actually are subsidized unit. They either have some kind of state or federal tax credit associated with it that gives it a 55-year requirement that it stay affordable. Probably the one most recent in people's mind is Courier Place. That was assisted with some of the city's redevelopment agency funding back, I believe, about 12 years ago. So amongst all the assisted units, whether it's the Claremont Senior Apartments on Indian Hill, Claremont Courier, Claremont Villas on Arrow Highway, or Access Village on Town Avenue, there's a property on San Jose. That total number is about 474 subsidized units that we watch the dates of when those affordability covenants may be going away, and just keep that on our radar and talk about that in our plan as well. Accessory dwelling units are increasing in popularity in Claremont and really all of California. They're a great source of providing affordable units. SCAG has actually gone out and done a formal survey all across their regions, and for LA County, they've come up with actually LA County split into two areas of analysis, but it actually is breaking down how many of our units we can count for different affordability levels, and we'll be building all of that into our projected numbers in our housing element. But I think we're projecting in future years that we'd have as high as like 48 new ADUs per year. So a certain percentage we can claim as low income, a certain percentage moderate, and then the remainder at market rate. Also on a lot of people's minds right now is SB 9. We believe we don't quite know what impact yet, but we think it will have an impact on providing additional affordable units in Claremont. The Planning Commission has actually asked me to do a formal presentation. I believe I'll be doing that at the next Planning Commission meeting to talk about what that means to Claremont. And this is referred to as the duplex law. This is, in one sense, erasing single family zoning entirely from the state of California. It's saying any existing single family zoned lot could be subdivided roughly in half ministerially at a non-discretionary level, and then a duplex built on each parcel. So conceivably going from one housing unit to where there used to be one housing unit, now potentially 4 housing units. And that has some people very nervous and uncomfortable. We'll see where it goes, how attractive that will be. There are many caveats associated with that type of urban lot split it's referred to. You can't demolish a house on the property that was previously had a tenant in it within the last 3 years. The owner has to sign a covenant that they will live on the property for 3 years after the new units are built. And staff feels that there just may be some difficulty on smaller or maybe even medium-sized lots in trying to build a fourplex where there was a single unit And it has to do with things like where do you put a driveway on a property to the back units? If you're going to split the lot down the middle, are you going to be, essentially creating a new property line through the middle of an existing house? So there are several caveats, but others feel that it's a great bill because we haven't built this, what's referred to as missing middle housing since 1940-ish across the nation, where neo-traditional neighborhoods used to have an eclectic mix of units within a neighborhood. You would have a fourplex on the corner and a row of single-family homes. You would have a fourplex or a sixplex in the middle of a single-family neighborhood. So it's obviously has pros and cons, and probably very strong emotional opinions of everybody in the state of California. So we expect there will probably be a lot of cleanup legislation in coming years due to issues or difficulties or snags that come up with that, but it'll be interesting for sure. The city also has an inclusionary housing ordinance that's been in place for 15 years. It's produced 67 units. All of those units have been for moderate level buyers, not for low or very low. The city council recognizes that there was a lot of community pressure recently to modify and amend that ordinance, and it has been amended. So it requires a minimum of 5% in new projects, not only for sale product, but also for rental projects. There was a slight delay for projects that are included in what we refer to as pipeline projects. And that was meant to not disrupt developers that had already been in escrow for months or years and had predetermined purchase prices, and it would potentially have their projects not be built at all because of the financial costs. So to meet our fair share, I don't think Claremont's going to have a problem. Staff and our consultants and the community participation as well does have some aggressive numbers in there as far as densities. Looking at what sites are suitable throughout the city, the state tells us that they can either be vacant residentially zoned properties, they can be vacant and non-residentially zoned that allow residential, like a mixed use designation. They can be underutilized residentially or non-residentially zoned, that can be rezoned or capable of being developed at higher densities or intensities. So the map I'm going to show you in a moment has 139 parcels identified that we believe fit those categories, and they're essentially 39 distinct groupings, and their rezoning we're proposing at 30 to 60 units per acre. And the process that the city used along with our consultant team was a GIS data-driven process to ID as many sites as possible. It was a weighted model. It looked at things like how much lot coverage was occurring, what year the structures were built, what land value is in place versus the improvement value, and added a weighted score to each of those. And that's partially the result of what this map came up with here as sites throughout the city. In addition, the city had a live interactive map on its dedicated webpage for the housing element. So for a number of months, we had the community, ID sites that they felt were appropriate, not appropriate, comment on sites that they felt were appropriate, not appropriate. And so this map is the end result of the sites that, through a combination of this weighted scaling and staff recommendation and consultant recommendation and community input that we came up with. There's certainly going to be controversy associated with some of these sites when they do ultimately come before the Planning Commission and the City Council for consideration. I'm sure you read about that in the paper on occasion, and certainly will continue to hear about it because the Claremont residents get involved and they have opinions, and rightfully so. The more participation we get, the better in this process. You can see a lot of it's clustered around where the Metrolink station is today, and hopefully in the short term, not the long term, we have a light rail gold line station get funded, even though there's a huge funding gap right now. We're hopeful that that gets funded, but you can see the majority of it is below baseline. And that's some of the complaints that we've received from the community, is that it needs to be dispersed throughout the community. And I would argue that ADUs make that happen. SB9 will probably make that happen. You know, some of the more controversial sites are going to be the vacant La Puerta school site at the top of Indian Hill that's adjacent to the existing sports fields. The Marie Callender's former Marie Callender site has been scraped and is vacant. We actually have housing developers proposing on that site as we speak. The Village South specific plan, just located on Indian Hill Boulevard between Arrow Highway and the rail tracks. So you can, most of you can probably recognize where those sites are on this map, even though it's at a fairly zoomed out scale. And finally, one of the big new requirements is that AB 686 brought to California a few years ago, actually 4 years ago, is affirmatively furthering fair housing. And it is now embedded and required in housing elements, and it's defined as taking meaningful action to combat discrimination that overcomes patterns of segregation and foster inclusive communities free of barriers that restrict access to opportunity for persons of color, persons of disabilities, and other protected classes. So you're going to hear a lot about that in the element, a lot of analysis. Again, I'm going to caveat those last 2 bullet points because I just saw the data for the first time today. The analysis that came out of all these mapping studies and census data studies actually identified that Claremont does not have disadvantaged communities or racially or ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. So again, these are very precise definitions that are set in the analysis. And again, some may not believe that, but that's, I believe, what's going to show at the end of the day. It's interesting too, one comment made that I saw by our consultant was that Northern Claremont has better opportunity and access to educational facilities. And then it makes an argument that the southern portion of Claremont actually has better access to jobs and transit and those type of connections. So again, looking forward to getting that document out to the community for comment. State law also requires when cities are updating their housing elements that they update their safety elements. So you will see a safety element of the city as part of the housing element update. Things like climate change are going to be required to be in that discussion. So we are yet to see that at a staff level, but we will see that soon. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah, that's it. So thank you for your time.
Would you like me to read the questions from the chat? We have quite a handful.
Sure. Do we have an end? Do we have an end time? Do I need to keep track of that?
No, not really. Okay, well, I'll start with the first question. Someone asked, how much does the student population cause major changes in the population?
So if they are in congregate type of facilities where they don't have their individual kitchens and living units, they're in a dormitory type of environment, those don't get counted as far as housing units. And we don't have to plan and use those numbers. But for instance, like KGI that built their new facility just south of the railroad tracks, west of Indian Hill Boulevard, those are fully self-contained units. So they have their own kitchens, and we do look at what their rents are and how many individuals live in a unit to determine what income category. So it plays into a sense in some areas and not others. There's discussion in parts of the city that are closest to the colleges about how many students or faculty are renting those units and occupying those units. So it does have interplay, certainly with the housing element.
Okay, great. And then another question was how much of the population over, I believe 65, is made up from the Pilgrim Place?
I'm not sure what the population count is at Pilgrim Place. I'm gonna have to get back to you on that answer, or maybe somebody else in the room knows the answer and we'll write it on the chat screen for me.
Yeah, that'd be nice to know, I guess. Okay, another question. RHNA shows 1,711 new units. There will be new kids. How is the city coordinating this potential growth with CUSD?
So the type of coordination that goes on really boils down to what developers pay for school impact fees on a square foot basis. So when a developer comes in, whether it's a fourplex or a apartment building or a condo building or a single family home development, they're paying a pretty large impact fee to the school district, and the school district has been satisfied that those type of fees will cover their future growth needs. We haven't heard differently, so they may weigh in on this element and share some concerns with us, but I believe they actually have a declining enrollment. So I believe they'll actually be satisfied to see new housing in the city, to hope that they don't have to close any of their existing schools.
Another question. Instead of a developer, how come Habitat for Humanity couldn't have been utilized instead?
They do very small scale projects, at least what I've seen of their organization. They did a project actually in Claremont at First Street. First Street and Monte Vista Avenue. I believe it's six detached homes that still have a number of years of affordability requirements associated with them. So they have done at least that project in Claremont, but they generally, to my knowledge, I can only think of one other city that I've heard of a bigger project, like 14 or 24 units. But no, that is certainly an organization that can do projects in Claremont, and they are what we refer to as a mission-driven type of developer. And those are the type of the developers those are the only type of developers that are really going to build true affordable housing in cities.
Another question was, is the water going to be an issue when you allow double the housing? I assume that means like the duplexing on properties.
We certainly hear about water shortages all the time. The governor is preaching that to us daily in the news. So it's an issue. I mean, I think the type of water saving measures that are in place in current building codes comparatively to decades old building codes certainly require fixtures that use a lot less water. Certainly there's other sustainable types of activities like capturing rainwater, reusing what we refer to as gray water from your sinks and washing machines to go to your garden. So there are creative solutions, but yeah, certainly a concern.
Can you estimate the number? Oh, sorry, someone asked another question. Can you estimate the number of SB9 conversions and count them towards our RHNA numbers?
So one of the criticisms of SB9 is that it did not require any type of affordability requirements or covenants. That's from the housing advocacy groups that criticize SB9 and say it's not going to produce because there's no requirement that they be low or very low income or even moderate. So I can't tell you what my guesstimate is until we do some more analysis, but obviously it's going to produce smaller units because there's going to be property owners in town that want to take advantage of that bill. And if you have a medium-sized lot, even, you're going to end up at the end of the day with a smaller unit, and the smaller unit, smaller square footage, ultimately is going to be less of a sales price. So there's a correlation between them, but not a mandatory requirement. And I haven't done like a full spreadsheet analysis of what we expect. I mean, it's very expensive to subdivide. It's very complicated. It's very expensive to build. It's very complicated. So your average resident, can they handle that? I don't know.
Under SB 9, the developer is not required to upgrade utility infrastructures. Where will the city get the funding to accommodate these costs?
So we have a pretty significant development impact fee for things like our sewer system in Claremont that the city does own very large portions of throughout the city. So for instance, when the Claremont colleges come in and they do a big project, they pay a very sizable sewer impact fee. And it's not just based on exactly on what their one building is going to be or the one segment in front of their property. It's based on the entirety of our system. So we believe the impact fees and things like our sewer system are actually in good condition today. It's not like the city has failing sewer infrastructure. We're actually quite blessed that it's in good condition, and we feel we have development impact fees that will capture keeping it that way.
Good. Wow, we got a lot of great questions. Thank you, everyone. Okay, on to the next one. Concentrating high-density, multi-floor developments in and around the village will change the village. In what ways? Will it make the village less attractive to out-of-town customers? Will it make our village less able to survive new competition from 1.5 million square feet in North Montclair?
Those are great questions. I wish I had a crystal ball to tell you the answer. No, I mean, I think every community can use new housing. I think there is a huge demand for housing. Average homes in Claremont are nearing $1 million now, and it feels like we're in San Francisco Bay Area to me at these prices. So I think every city has a need for housing. There's certainly a concern. I know there's a concern for people on massing and scale and what that does to a neighborhood or surrounding environments or people even driving by a neighborhood. Certainly it's a change and it's different, and it's going to be difficult for some people to embrace. But I think the need for housing really it is a crisis. And we have very high design standards here in Claremont. We have a great architectural commission that has professional architects, professional landscape architects on board. They will do a good job. It will be a change and it will look different. And it's just a reality we're in.
Okay, another question. Will the land across from the Armstrong Gardens ever be developed? Is that a part of Claremont?
Across from the Armstrong Gardens, that's I believe it's referred to as the East Campus project, and the majority of that site is in the city of Upland, and maybe a quarter of it is in the city of Claremont. And yes, they do plan on constructing sports fields in the base of that pit. We refer to it as a former mining pit. They do have plans to build sports fields. I don't think it'll be in the real short term. I think it's probably 6 years out, maybe.
That'd be interesting to see. Here's a question that I asked earlier, but I think you kind of answered it earlier. Do senior assisted facilities count toward the housing element or skilled nursing?
Senior assisted housing developments certainly do. Skilled nursing, because they're not individual self-contained units with their kitchens, would not.
Okay. Someone says, I saw that Claremont was the most expensive of the areas shown, but had the least percentage increase. Will these new housing units increase, decrease, or not materially affect the value increase?
I would argue that they would increase the values. Again, it's in my opinion, whenever there's new construction adjacent to properties, it only brings their property values up.
What possibility is there that the state will reinstate redevelopment or comparable / similar measure to capture and utilize funds locally?
I think very little. I mean, I went to a presentation right before the pandemic where the governor showed up himself and heard directly from him that there's just no political support for that at a state level. So I'm just taking that from the governor's mouth directly, that it doesn't seem politically feasible in his mind at this time.
Okay. What do you surmise contributed to the city of Claremont being placed on a 4-year cycle? Do you think redlining was an issue?
I think it was just very strong neighborhood concerns. I've only been here 4 years, and that probably goes back more like 7 or 8 years that triggered some very long public hearings and some very contentious public hearings and some very negative feelings about wanting what is perceived as bad affordable housing in people's single family neighborhoods, and that's certainly understandable. Change is scary, and the unknown is scary, and I think it's just because Claremont has a very involved citizenry, and as much as the state wants us to move very quickly, Claremont is known for its process and processing public hearing items, and that environment is changing too, because the state has some new legislation that for sites that are already zoned for housing, we can't hold more than 5 meetings, and meetings are very loosely defined as pretty much any type of meeting. So unfortunately, the process issue for Claremont that we feel has been great because we get participation. Unfortunately, in the future, maybe a little less of that. But I think it was just people concerned for their neighborhoods that delayed it, is my perception.
Somebody says there seems to be endless railing about La Puerta and others saying we don't want this or we oppose that. Do these same people ever give a clear signal as to what they do want, or is it largely leave it as is?
They do give a clear signal. They want what their neighborhood looks like. And again, that's understandable. I think people that live in a neighborhood that has a certain density level, it has a certain number of stories to their buildings, has a look and feel that they love, and feel like their property values have gone up because of that. And that's their entire nest egg, and to carry them through the rest of their life for any equity they've seen in that, I totally understand that. So it's that's what we hear from the community, and there's certainly strong cases to be made on that opinion, and there's strong cases to be made from developers that say we don't build that way anymore. We built that way in the 70s, and we build differently today, and it's a challenging conundrum we're in.
Sure. Moving on, I don't see where the 384 potential ADU units, which could count in the RHNA, are in the housing element plan so far. When will we see those added?
You will see those in about 3 to 4 weeks, I hope. It's again language that I just saw today for the first time in some draft documents. So we will be rolling those out to the community shortly.
Back to La Puerta. For the La Puerta Park parcel under consideration for sale to the offshore developer TrueMark Homes, are the current plans for just the formal school site, approximately 9 acres, or would the entire La Puerta Park parcel from Forbes to Indian Hill, which is approximately 18 acres for both the old school site and current park site, to be sold to TrueMark Homes?
It is proposed just for the 9-acre easterly portion of that was the former school site. It is not currently designed for any of the sports field area. We just received a couple of weeks ago a slightly reduced project where they were proposing to use about 1 acre of the sports fields, and they were proposing to add some ball fields to Cahuilla Park. The developer has withdrawn both of those proposals, and those formal plans are actually submitted. They're actually on the city's webpage for the La Puerta project. So I'd encourage anybody on this call and share with your friends and family that please go look at that webpage on the city's website, because you will see the modified project, and it's very clear that it's on the 9 acres.
That's a good point. There's always a lot of resources out there about what's going on in the city. Okay, moving on. Have already existing units all be counted? Our block has 8 to 9 back units that may not all be counted.
There's, I'm sure, probably dozens, if not more, if not in the hundreds of back units that are not permitted. Garage conversions, shed conversions, you name it. Shacks built 50 years ago that didn't have building permits. We're actually in a time period where the state legislation for ADUs doesn't allow cities for a 5-year period to go after and actually remove people from those units unless there is true life safety issues involved with them. So that's a difficult question to answer because we don't know if they're permitted or not. We're certainly looking at ADU legislation at a local level to encourage people to legalize those and have them meet building codes and safety codes, and then they certainly can be counted.
Okay. Will site number 5 and site number 6 be removed for considerations of rezoning? These sites are surrounded by single home families and would need 5 to 4 story buildings to meet the 60 units per acre requirement.
I believe site number 5 was like 3 parcels south of Arrow Highway on Indian Hill Boulevard. If that's the case, yes, that site will be removed. We did hear that comment at the scoping meeting for the housing element a couple of weeks ago, and staff agrees that should be removed. And we're not saying every single site is perfect. We're open to community input, and we heard that input, and we've reacted, and we'll present those findings to the Planning Commission and City Council.
Great. One ADU unit is around $100,000 to $120,000. You stated that the new units are over $400,000. Can we somehow incentivize more ADUs or SB9 units to create lower income units?
We can, and there's been talk of that in the community. I think those numbers are even going much higher than the 100 and 120 that the commenter asked about. I'm hearing numbers closer to 175,000 to 200,000 now. And again, a lot of that has to do with the types of finishes that you put in the unit at the end of the day. But again, materials and labor prices are so high. But no, that is, the commenter is absolutely correct. That is a lot less than 400,000 or 500,000 for an apartment building, one unit that has a lot more soft and hard costs associated with it. So no, that's certainly being talked about in the community.
When was La Puerta added to the list as a site of interest for this kind of development, especially considering that it was zoned for public use? It was not on, so what changed?
What changed is we've been out for a few community meetings, and at the last community meeting, we again heard a lot of interest from the housing advocacy community in town that we're ignoring everything north of baseline. And so staff struggled to find properties that could accommodate affordable housing units at any magnitude other than the La Puerta site. So I think just as far as interest in having the discussion in a public setting, that's why that was placed back on there. And that's why it was on there. Just again, community input, wanting to disperse, I guess these, you might even say larger development sizes of affordable units throughout the community. And instead of saying, hey, you're concentrating them all in South Claremont or Central Claremont or around the Metrolink station. So that's why.
Why were the colleges excluded from the inclusionary housing ordinance? Oh, whenever there's a new message, like my speed like slips all the way down. Sorry. Why were the colleges excluded from the inclusionary housing ordinance when their population and jobs increases the number of RHNA units to be built by Claremont? They have many acres of no-cost land.
Excuse me. Choking on my water. I don't know that when the inclusionary housing ordinance was originally proposed to the city council 15 years ago, I anticipate those conversations were had at that time. Many times when new ordinances are proposed, obviously stakeholders that are impacted have opinions and want to lobby their opinion and make arguments on why it doesn't make sense for it to apply to them. And that I'm sure occurred 15 years ago and predated me. So I'd have to research that answer and get back to the commenter.
Okay. You say that there is a need for, you say that there is an enormous need for housing. This person says they drive Arrow Highway on a regular basis and see new buildings with vacancy signs all up and down Arrow, the same in Upland. Can you explain why there are so many vacancies if there is such a great need for housing?
I guess I didn't totally understand the vacancy part of the question. If it's up and down Arrow Highway, I'm presuming that may be office buildings that potentially because of the pandemic, people are working from home a lot more. I don't know. If that is the case, then if it's a vacancy for an office building, I mean, maybe that's a prime candidate to become a housing site. If the commenter is arguing that vacancy is on an apartment building or something of that nature, the facts actually prove out the opposite. We have a 1.8% vacancy rate in our apartment buildings in Claremont, and in generally speaking, a healthy vacancy rate for rental units is in a community is 5%. With single family homes, again, generally a healthy vacancy rate is 2%. We have a 0.9% vacancy rate in Claremont. So our vacancy rates are extremely low and probably unhealthy if you believe the housing experts, which drives up costs. Why you see houses selling for $900,000 now.
Yeah, like my next door house, crazy. In the block of properties around Marie Callender's, the Marie Callender's site itself is over 30 units, is that per acre, and would add some low-income housing, but all others are only 15. Why is that?
I don't believe those numbers are entirely accurate. We have in our current draft the 3.5 acres approximately for the Marie Callender site at 40 units per acre. It's current. Well, here's the confusion. Currently, it's 15 per acre in our zoning code for the city. We proposed it to be 20 per acre in our presentations to the community on the housing element. We heard feedback that 20 was too low. It should be higher. So we recently doubled it from 20 to 40 per acre. And so again, if you go on the city's webpage and you look at the initial study that's on the city's website, you'll see a very large spreadsheet in one of the appendices that identifies that site, and that number is now 40 per acre.
Okay, I guess I'll end up on a few more questions. Didn't want to keep you all night long. Okay, so here I go. Someone made a statement and then I'll ask another question in the same aspect. Respectfully, your response, someone else said you had a great answer to something else, but I don't remember what it was. Okay, respectfully, your response about what people want in terms of La Puerta say totally misrepresents a large number of people who want it to stay public and be developed into something for sports and for public use. And then someone else says, is there an implied agreement with TrueMark to change the zoning to residential for La Puerta school site, 9 acres or 18 acres, since the escrow closes in December and before the city allows for public comments?
So to the first comment, I'll respectfully respect that comment because I think that's true also. I'm sure there is a large contingency of homeowners surrounding that site that do agree it should remain publicly zoned, publicly general planned, and stay as a publicly used parcel. So that commenter is absolutely correct. I think the people that we hear from staff that say, okay, we're willing to accept housing, we want it to look like ours. So I'll say there's probably 3 camps. There's probably 5 camps, but those are 2 of the big camps of make it look like ours and keep it public. So the commenter is absolutely correct. There's others that say put high density there, that think it should be shared in every neighborhood. So it's again, very varied opinions of on that property. And there's no implied agreement between the city and TrueMark. I doubt there's any implied agreement between CUSD and TrueMark. It's certainly a developer's risk when they enter escrow and they want to try to develop in any community. Development is a risk, and 3 different developments have tried to go on that La Puerta site and had no success and probably lost money in their endeavor to do so. So I can't gauge or guarantee any vote of any planning commissioner or any city council member. Staff's job is to simply process an application. So it's a matter between the developer and CUSD, what they agree to sales price, and we will take them through the Claremont process, and it's a onerous process, and I'm sure will be contentious and lengthy, and I do not know what the end result will be.
It's a very hot topic, isn't it?
Yes.
Someone says, just to be clear regarding the La Puerta, regarding La Puerta, since the entire 18.5 acre parcel is currently spanning from Forbes to Indian Hill, will there be an official lot split to ensure that the western portion of La Puerta to remain a park and continue to be owned by COSD and leased to the city as a park for the duration of the remaining lease term?
There will be a subdivision map that we refer to as a tract map. And that tract map will go through the planning commission and ultimately city council process. And it will be subdivided, and it will be very clear where the lot lines are. And the park, the sports park is not any part of that subdivision.
Okay, one last statement. Someone said, respectfully, my question was about apartments and condos all up and down Arrow Highway in Montclair and the same on Monte Vista and Upland, not commercial property. These communities are right next door to us. I guess in the terms of the vacancy question.
I would argue Claremont is a much more desirable community to live in, and our vacancy rates are very low.
Okay, that's a good answer. That gets us all caught up with the questions. So thank you very much, everyone, for all those great questions. I feel like I learned a lot. That's it, I guess. Thank you very much again to Mr. Brad Johnson for your very detailed presentation about the housing element and for answering all those questions. And thanks to everyone else for being here. That's it, unless anyone else has anything else they'd like to say real briefly.
Great job, Brad. Good job.
Thank you.
Great. I guess that wraps up our meeting then. Have a happy Halloween, everyone, and stay safe. That's it. Bye.
All right. Good job.
How do I end this?